Hello everyone and welcome to episode 10, the second to last episode of my beginner Python tutorial series. This video and the next are actually both going to be working on the same project, that being a text adventure dungeon crawler. In this part, we will be setting up the foundations of our code and making most of the core mechanics of our gameplay loop. In the next episode, we will finish the core mechanics and build upon the foundations that we are going to make this episode into a complete product. This is by far the most sophisticated project we have ever done, but with all of the knowledge you have acquired from the previous episodes, you should certainly be able to complete it. Now, let us begin our final project. Okay, so this is going to be a multi-file project. So before we do anything, let us make a new file. So I'm going to right-click, hit New, hit Folder, and right here I will name it Dungeon Crawler. You can name this folder whatever you want. This is up to you. Now from here, let's make our main script. So when we make this file, I'm going to name mine main.py. You do not have to name yours this. You can name it dungeoncrawler.py, whatever you want, but name this something that makes it seem important. Okay, so because we are making a dungeon crawler, a ton of a dungeon crawler is built off of characters, right? Because you have enemies and you have heroes. So what we are going to do is we're going to make a simple class to store a blueprint for any character that we want to make. And all classes, it is a bundle of information that we keep all nice together. It's a blueprint for making new characters. So pay attention and let's code it. I'm going to type class, capital C, character, and now I've made a class called character. And real quickly, let's just put path through it. The reason why we're putting path is so that way it doesn't error. You'll see in a minute. But now we've made a class called character. All this is it is a blueprint for any character we want to make. It is not itself a variable. In fact, what we can do is we can make variables that are set to character. So for example, we can say player equals character, parentheses, and we can also say enemy equals character, parentheses. So now we've made a player and we've made an enemy. Now we can put information into these characters, right? So let's say with the player, let's try to set the player name. We can say player dot name equals, and then we can just type Sir Kaldar, or whatever you want your character's name to be. And we can also say player dot HP equals 10. And we can put a whole bunch of information in there like that. And then we can do the same thing for the enemy, right? We can type enemy dot name equals small slime, and we can say enemy dot HP equals 5. And now we have an enemy that has information and a character that has information. And then we can even print that information, right? We could say, hey, let's print the player dot name. And now when I run the code, it prints the player's name. So we're just bundling information into a character, right? We have a character named player, and then we're putting the name in it, and we're putting the HP in it. Now, this is very inefficient, because as you can tell, see how I had to type player.name, player.hp. Let's say we did like player.max HP, and then we also had player.dexterity, and then we had player.speed, and all these variables, right? It would be very, very cumbersome to have to copy and paste this or modify it for every single character, right? That's just a lot of code. So instead of doing all of this, we're going to come up to this class that we made and put the information in here. So let me get rid of all this, and we're going to do it in a much more efficient way. Up here, we are going to put a function or a method into this class. So I'm going to type def, just like we make a normal function, and then underscore underscore init underscore underscore. Now underscore is shift dash on your keyboard, so that is to the right of 0. Now that you've typed that, do parentheses, and then do self, and then colon. Now what this init does, it stands for initialize. Whatever you put in this code will run as soon as the character is made. So, if you can tell, there are some things we can do, right? I can say self.hp equals 10. And I can say self.speed equals 2. And all of this information, yeah? So now when I come down here, I can say player equals character. And then I can say print player.hp. And now when I run this, it prints how much health we have. So we can simply put all of the variables that we want to be on every character up here in the init area. So I'm going to remove this real quick, and let's keep working on this. Now, right now, if I wanted to name my player, I could do self.name equals, and then I can name him Sir Kaldar again. And you see all the names there, but what if we want to make an enemy? I will type in enemy equals character, and then if I print the enemy name, it says that the enemy's name is also Sir Kaldar. So the default name is Sir Kaldar for everything. We need to be able to put the name differently for every character very simply, right? Because we could make the enemy, and then we could do enemy.name equals small slime, and we could keep doing that for everything, right? We could say enemy.hp equals 5, etc. But this is going to get really boring again, and that's going to be too much code. So let's fix that. Instead of doing it the way we have done, we're going to pass a new variable into the function, and we're going to name it name. So pay attention. We have now put a second variable into the character. So now, when we make our character, we're going to set the name to the second variable. You see that? So self is the object itself, so don't worry about that, just ignore it. And we also have name. So we will set the self.name, whatever is passed as name. This might be a little confusing, but it should make sense when we make the character. Watch. When I make the player, so I will type player equals character, and then in parentheses, I can type in Sir Kaldar. The name variable will be set to Sir Kaldar, and then self.name is set to name. And then, watch, I can print player.name. And when I run it, it says Sir Kaldar. See that? So now we can pass all of the variables at the very beginning when we create the character. Let's just try to set a few basic variables. Let's put a few in here. Let's do self.hp, let's do self.maxhp, and then let's also do self.dexterity. Okay, so let's pass in even more variables. Instead of just putting self and name, let's also put HP, max HP, and dexterity. And now when we make the character, let's type in Sir Kaldar, which is his name. And then next is HP. I'll put his HP to 10. And then I will set his max HP 10 as well. And then I will set his dexterity to 5. If you don't know what dexterity means, dexterity simply means nimbleness, agility, or your ability to dodge in this game. So when we create our character, we just need to do self.name equals name, self.hp equals HP, self.max HP equals max HP, and then self.dexterity equals dexterity. So one more time, because sometimes this can be very difficult to understand. When we make a character, we are passing through the name, and then the health, and then the max health, and then the dexterity. And so up here, name will be set to the first variable we pass through, which is Sir Kaldar. And then the HP will be set to the second one, which is 10. The max HP will be set to the next one, which is 10. And the dexterity will be set to the next one, which is 5. And then when we initialize the character, it will simply set the name to whatever name we inputted, set the HP to whatever HP we inputted, etc. So that is it. Hopefully that makes sense. And now we're going to expand this character into all the stuff that we want it to be. So right now, let's just give the player a whole bunch of variables. And then as we make the character, I'm going to teach you what we're going to do with them. So right now, we are going to make the name HP, max HP, and then I'm also going to say self.strength equals strength. Self.dexterity equals dexterity. Self.max dexterity equals max dexterity. And then we're finally going to do self.speed equals speed. Now up here, let's pass through all the variables and make sure they're in order. So I did name, HP, max HP, strength. So it'll be name, HP, max HP, strength. Then we have dexterity, max dexterity, and speed. So we are passing through a whole bunch of variables now. Now let's set them all. So first we have HP, then max HP, then strength. So I'll keep my strength to 5 for now, why not? And then I'll set the dexterity to 5 as well, the max dexterity to 5, and the speed to 1. So now we have our character. This is all the information about our character. So if we run this code, it should run just fine, and we have no errors. In fact, we can even print all the information we have, right? We can print the player.hp. So now when we run the code, it'll print Sir Kaldar and then tell us that Sir Kaldar has 10 health. So this is working just fine. We've now made a new character class. It's going to be super useful. Hopefully you were able to understand most of that. So now we've made the character. I'm going to delete all this code down here. And now we're going to start getting into the game code. So I'm going to make a comment and say game code. Of course, you don't need to make comments. I'm just organizing my code. And in here, let's make the player. Now, before we make the player, let's let the player name their own character. So I'm going to say player name equals input, and then let's ask the player for a name. So I'll say, what is your hero's name? And now let's make a character. So I'll say player equals character. And now when we make the character, let's pass in player name. So that way whatever they typed in will now be the name of the character. And then all of the basics. So 10, 10, 5, 5, 5, and 1. Those will be the basic stats for the starter character. Now, when that's done, let's tell the player what his name is. So that way we make sure everything works. So I will write, got it, your name is, and then player.name. So now let's run the code and see what happens. It says, what is your hero's name? I will type me burning slime. And it says, got it, your name is me burning slime. See that? So now the code has made a new character object, put all of the basic stats in it, but it set the name to whatever we input. So that's kind of the starting code. That's what happens when the game starts. But now, let's make the basic gameplay loop. So if we come down here, I'm going to type gameplay loop. And now, in the gameplay loop, we want two things to happen. Let's talk about it. The first thing we want to do is to let the player take a turn. So the player could do stuff like attack the enemy, drink a healing potion, do whatever we want the character to be able to do. And then after the player takes a turn, we want the enemy to take a turn and attack the player. So let's code that. The first thing we need to do, of course, is to make the player be able to do stuff. So the first action we're going to give the player is to see his own stats, because we actually have a lot of code for that done already. So down here, let's say player input equals input, and then let's just ask the player what he wants to do. I'll say type an action. So if we run the code, it will ask us for a name. I'll type in the name. Then it says to type in an action. And so what we want to do is make it to where when we type inspect self, it will show the player's information. So let's go down here and type if player input equals. Remember, we need two equals for if statement. And then inspect self. Now, if it does equal inspect self, let's print the information, right? We could say print player.name. We could say print player.hp, etc. But this is going to take a very long time, and there is an even better way to do it. So we're going to delete this code and instead make a character function. So let's come back up here to the character class, and in here, let's make a new function or method in the character class. So below our init class, remember init just runs when the character is made. We are going to tab in once and only once, so we're not still in the init class. And I'm going to type def inspect. And then in inspect, we of course need to pass self. Now, when this function is called, let's make it print all the information about the character stats. So I will say print self.name, and then I will print self.hp, and then I will print self.maxhp, and then let's just keep doing the rest of them. So self.strength, and then print self.dexterity. Okay, now I've written down all the variables, so which will print all of the information about this character when we call inspect self. So all we need to do when we come down here into the player input is say player.inspect. And now when we run this code, it will run the inspect function from the player. So let's run the code. It says, what is your hero's name? I'll type in my hero's name as Meb. It says type in action. I'll type inspect self. And it tells me my name and all of the stats. See that? That's pretty cool. However, this is a little bit confusing. So let's make this a little bit cleaner. Instead of just saying self.name, let's say name, colon, and then plus. So we're just giving the player a bit of a description of each of the variables. So instead of just printing HP, let's say health, and then let's add that. So all I'm going to do is go through all these variables and add a little bit of a description to each of them. You should do the same. Okay, I have written down the names of all of these characters, but if you notice, if I run this code and I type in my name, and then I say inspect self, then it will error. And the reason why is because we didn't stringify these. We don't actually need to. It's just that instead of using plus signs, let's do commas. This code should work. I simply typed in a little bit of a description, wrote a comma, and then wrote the name of the variable. If yours errors, replace the plus signs with commas, and that should fix it. And now if I run this, then I can type need, and then it says type in action. I'll type inspect self. And look at that. It says name, Meeb, health 10, max health 10. This is way easier to read than before. Now the player knows exactly what they're looking at. So, good job in making the first action that the player can do. That's good progress. So, let's get to the enemy. Now, before we start doing the enemy, let's talk about how we're going to do it. In this game, I want there to be random enemies. Because of that, we're going to make a whole bunch of different stat numbers for each enemy, right? Because the goblin shouldn't have the same stats as the dragon. However, instead of just making a whole bunch of different variables, what we're going to do is make one enemy and then make it read from a file, and that file will be the enemy file. So let's get to that. Let's open up our folder again where we saved all of our code, and let's make an enemy. So let's open up our folder where we put our main.py, and let's make a new file. I'm going to make a text document, and I'm going to name this one slime.txt. Keep it .txt. So just a normal text file. Now in here, we're going to put in all of the variables that we used before. So if you see up here, we have name, HP, max HP, strength, etc. So all we need to do is come into this file, make the first line the name. So I will type in small slime. And then the next one, I will type in HP. So the HP for this slime, I'll put as 8. Max HP will be 8. Strength, I'll put it as 3. Dexterity, I'll put it as 2. This is a slime. It's not very dexterous. The max dexterity will be 2, and the speed will be 1. Keep the speed for 1 for almost every enemy. I will show you why in part 2 of this. But yes, now we have a file that has all of the information about our character. And we are going to use what we learned in the read file video to read that file and put all that information into the new enemy character. Okay, let's put our attention back into the code and program the enemy into it. Now, right now we have our character class. Below our character class, so not in the character class, after it, I'm going to type def new enemy. So we're making a new normal function. It's not part of the character class. It's just a normal function, just like we've done before. And then the name of our file. So remember, I named mine slime.txt. So in here, I am simply going to type, in parentheses, slime.txt. And then we're just going to treat this just like we have before with text files. So we're going to do R to read the file, and then as, and I'll type enemy file. So now that text file is saved as a variable called enemy file. Okay, so we have the enemy file in here, but now we need to set all the variables. So first, let's say the name of the enemy equals, and then let's come in here, and we will see that the first line of this text file says small slime. We can come into here and say name equals enemy file dot read line. Now what that does, it reads the first line of the text file and sets name to that first line. It's just like what we did before in the read file episode. However, we do have a bit of an issue. When we read small slime, it is also going to read the enter. This enter at the end of it to start the new line is also going to be read. So in order to get rid of that, we actually have a super easy and simple dot strip. So now it will get rid of the enter at the end of the line. So now that we have that, let's set all of the other variables. So I'm going to say HP equals enemy file dot read line dot strip. However, we need this to be an integer, and right now it is a string. So we're going to do int and turn this into an integer. There we go. Now all we need to do is do the same exact thing, but for every other variable. So that was HP. The next one, if we look up on our list, is max HP. So I can just come down here, paste that in, max HP, and then do the next line, and that one will be strength, etc. Okay, I have all of the variables in here now. Now, all we need to do after we make the variables is, watch this, we are going to simply return the new enemy type. So in here, I will say character, and then in here, we're going to make the character have the name that we set, HP that we set, the max HP that we set, etc. So I'll just type all of these in here. So now when we call the function new enemy, it will return a new character that is built off of our text file here. So that's pretty awesome. So down here, after we make the player, let's make an enemy. So I'll say enemy equals new enemy. It's that simple because we named our function new enemy. That's all we need to do. Let's run the code. Now we'll type in my name and we will see an error. And the error is actually because I forgot to add these parentheses here in the read line. Silly me. Hopefully you caught that mistake. Okay, let's try again. I run the code, I type in my name, and look at that. The code did not error, so I can now inspect myself just like normal. But now let's add a new function, and it's going to be really, really easy to add this. Watch, let's recap what we've done. It should be very clear what we need to do next. We made a player character. We then set the player character's stats. We then made an enemy. We made a command option to where when the player types in inspect self, it'll do player.inspect and show all the information about the player. Now, let's make it to where we can inspect the enemy. Now, use your brain for a second and think how we're going to do that. It should be very obvious. All we need to do is do elif for else if player input equals inspect enemy. Then all we need to do is call the function we already made in the enemy. Remember, every character object already has the inspect function. So we can simply type in here enemy.inspect. And now let's run the code. I'll type in my name as Meb and then type in action. I will say inspect enemy. And look at that. It gave me all the information about the enemy. It works perfectly. So that was very simple to just add a new enemy. That's the goal for this project, to make a very solid foundation so you can add whatever you want to this game once we're done with it. All right. Now, we do have one issue right now, though, and that is that if I run the code and I type in my name and I try to inspect myself, it'll work. And if I try to inspect the enemy, it won't work because we already did our action. So remember, we just did an if statement and then otherwise do this one, the code's done. We don't want that. We want the gameplay loop to loop back to the beginning. So at the beginning of the gameplay loop, let's do while true and then put all of this stuff tabbed into the while true loop. Now when we run the code, it says, what is your hero's name? I'll type in Lord Meeb again. I type in action, I can inspect self. And now it says type in action again, and so now we can do another action. So I can either inspect myself again, or I can inspect the enemy. And there we go. So now we can see all the information about the enemy, and we can see the information about the player, and we can do it multiple times. That's awesome. We already have a whole bunch of the basics done. But now it's time to move on to the next part of the gameplay loop, and that is making attack. So the first thing we need to do, of course, is check if the player typed in attack. Let's do elif player input equals attack. Now we need to make it to where the player can do damage to the enemy. To do that, though, we want to make it to where the enemy and the player have a chance to dodge attacks. So let's do that first. All we're going to do is come up here and make a new function inside of the character class. In fact, I'm going to put a little bit of space in between the new enemy and the character stuff, just so we know that the new enemy function is not part of the character. But yes, up here in the character, let's make a new function under inspect. Remember, only have it tabbed in once. Now we'll type in def dodge roll. Now this will give the player a chance to dodge. Now I'm going to use an equation that I know works pretty well and I think it's pretty fun. So let's do that, but if you want to make your own equation and you understand it, you're more than welcome to. But for the dodge roll, I'll say evade chance equals 10 plus self dot dexterity. And then let's type in evade attempt equals, and then we want to roll a random number because this is an RPG and random numbers are a big part of it. However, we haven't imported the random yet, so let's go up to the very top of the code and let's import the built-in library in Python called random. So I'm just going to type in import random. Now that we have random imported, I can simply come down here and type in random.rand int 1, evade chance. And then if the evade attempt is less than or equal to self.dexterity, return true. Otherwise, return false. So out of all of the code that you are doing, this is the least important part for you to understand. This is simply just an equation that I came up with that I thought was kind of fun for this game. I will talk through it right now, though, just so you can try to understand. It's not too complicated. All we do is make a random number between 1 and 10 plus your dexterity. So let's say your dexterity is 5. So it'll be a random number between 1 and 15. And then if that number is equal to or less than your dexterity, which is 5, then you've successfully dodged. Otherwise, you have failed, and it will return false. Okay, so we just made a dodge roll function. There is now a chance for the character to successfully dodge. So now let's make a function to take damage. So I'm simply going to say def take damage. And so let's pass self, and then also the damage value. So I'll just type damage. And then all we need to do is say self.hp minus equals damage. So now we have a function to dodge the attack, and we have a function to take damage. Both of these are inside of the character. So now that we have a whole bunch of functions inside of this class, let's make it to where the enemy can actually take damage. So the first thing we need to do is outside of the character function, let's do a little function just for an attack. So we'll define attack as a function outside of the character. And now we need to pass two things. We need to pass who's attacking and who's defending. So we'll simply type attacker, defender. And now let's think about this. We need the attacker to be the player and the defender to be the enemy in this situation. So I'm going to say if defender dot dodge roll equals true, so that means that they did dodge, let's print miss. So if it failed to dodge, then let's make the enemy take damage. I'm going to type in here print hit. Now all we need to do is make the enemy take damage. So we can say defender dot take damage, and then let's simply pass the attacker dot strength. So it'll take as much damage as the attacker has strength. So I know that was a lot. Let's talk about it real quick. All we did is make a function that will take the player and the enemy. If the enemy who is being attacked is able to successfully dodge, remember we made a function for a dodge roll right here, then it will print the word miss. Otherwise, so the enemy failed the dodge roll, then it will print hit, and then we'll call this function to make the enemy take damage according to how strong the attacker is, which in this case the attacker is the player. So let's go down here, and all we need to do, because we put this all in a function, is say attack, and then we just need to pass in the attacker and the defender, remember? So the attacker will be the player, and the defender will be the enemy. Now when we run the code, it says what is your hero's name? I will type in Meb. And now, first things first, let's inspect the enemy. The enemy currently has 8 health. Now, I'm going to say attack. When I attack, look at that, it says it's hit, so the enemy failed the dodge roll. Now, let's inspect the enemy, and we will see that the enemy's down to 3 health. So we did 5 damage, which is correct, because if we inspect ourselves, we'll see that we do 5 damage, because we have 5 strength. So our code is working perfectly to our knowledge, but first let's make sure that the enemy can actually dodge. So I will simply attack again, attack again, attack again. And actually, I made a mistake because the enemy will always hit. And that is because if we go back to our dodge roll attack, I forgot to put parentheses here. So make sure to put parentheses here, otherwise the dodge roll will not work. But anyways, let me restart this. And now that I've remembered to put parentheses on my function, let's attack, attack, attack. And look at that, there's a small chance that when you attack the enemy, it will miss, because the enemy has low dexterity. But if we up the dexterity a lot to like, let's say 20 or 30, then the enemy has a very high chance of dodging the attack. So now we actually have the full framework for a combat system that just works right out of the box. So this is super awesome. We've done a lot of progress on this project. We have the character, we have the dodge roll, we have the ability for characters to take damage, and then we also made an attack function outside of the character that first checks for a dodge roll, and then if the dodge roll fails, then the defender takes damage. And we also were able to summon an enemy, and we're able to make the player character, and we're able to have the player do multiple different actions. We have actually almost all of the basic framework up already. All we need to do next is add the dexterity mechanics, make it to where the enemy can die, the player can die, and the enemy can attack. However, we are out of time for now, so I'm going to end the video here, but next episode we're going to completely finish the basics and add some cool polished mechanics. So hopefully you enjoyed. Take a moment to just look over your code and make sure you understand anything. If you're encountering errors, I'm just going to scroll through the code real quickly. So that way you can double check all of your code and make sure that everything looks exactly like mine. And hopefully you've enjoyed, and I will see you in the next episode.